Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a special session of the Grant Writing Workshop series. We are joined today by Lucy Deckard with Academic Research Funding Strategies. And today, Lucy is going to speak with us about how to win NSF Early Career and other early career grants. Thank you for joining us, Lucy.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So these slides are all going to be available for you to download, and this is the link here. So let me go ahead and put this in the chat so you can just click on it. And because there are a number of links in here, and so they're much more helpful if you can download the slides and then you can put it in the PowerPoint in presentation mode, then click on the link and it should take you there. If it doesn't, just copy the link and then put it into your browser and it should work. Okay, and then there are also additional materials that are also, this is a Dropbox link. So if you, would like to see examples, some excerpts from successful career proposals, they're there, they're annotated. There's also additional materials such as articles that I've written for our newsletter that are about various aspects of planning proposals to NSF and particularly NSF career proposals. This is just a link to my our website. So if you want to know more about academic research funding strategies, this is where you go. And then the most important thing here is my email address. So if you have any questions later that you wish you had asked, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer questions. So as we go through, if you do have any questions, just put them in the chat and I'm happy to answer them as we go along. And if you would, prefer to ask by voice, just ask, just kind of say, hey, I have a question, and then I'll recognize you and you can unmute yourself. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is just general early career grants, like what's kind of common for not just the NSF career, but Department of Defense early career and NIH Young Innovator and so forth awards. Okay, then I'm going to focus in on the NSF career, and the reason I do that is because it is by far the largest grant program for early career faculty, and it's the most broad in terms of the number of disciplines, the number of the types of research that it funds. So that's why we focus on that. Also, most of what I say about the NSF early career in terms of how to write one of these proposals will apply to many of the other early career grants, except there is also an education outreach component that is not going to be in many of the other ones. But the research part will apply. Okay, so I will talk about just quickly how to plan your project and how to write the various sections of your proposal. And this will all focus again on the NSF career, but I'll kind of talk about how that might be somewhat different for other early career programs. I won't go into a lot of just the fundamental stuff about NSF and National Science Foundation and how how you understand how they're organized and all that stuff in a lot of detail, because last month we did a webinar all on NSF. So I will quickly refer to things, but if you didn't attend that one, that is available for streaming. So you can download the slides for that one and you can see in much more nitty-gritty detail how to figure out who your program officer is and all that kind of stuff, and what all the processes that NSF uses and all that kind of detail that we don't have time for today is in that prior webinar. So you have access to that. Okay, and then we'll talk about, what do you do if you don't get funded? So, for most of these grant programs, it's very likely you won't get funded the first time you submit. And so a big part of being successful is learning from your reviews and then revising your proposal and resubmitting it. So we'll talk about how to do that. Okay, so there are a number of early career and junior faculty programs, and this is a very partial list that I'm going to go through here just to give you a flavor. But if you have a funder, whether it's a professional organization or a foundation, private foundation, or other agencies that maybe I'm not mentioning here, look to see if they have grant programs, particularly for early career researchers. A lot of times they will, and the whole reason they do that is because they want to encourage the next generation scholars that they're going to want to fund in the future. So that many funders are very motivated to try to help, particularly what they would consider the stars. So you want to, figure out how you can make that case that you're this kind of star that they're going to want to fund in the future. And that's why they should probably want to fund you for an early career kind of grant. Okay. But let's give some specific examples. So NSF Career is one of as I said earlier, the largest program. So they give about 600 awards a year. Okay. By comparison, if you look at many of these other ones, they give 30, 40, something like that, right? Very few even give up to 100 a year. So again, that's why NSF Career is kind of the big daddy that many people will be interested in if you're doing research of interest to NSF. Okay. There is also the Office of Naval Research Young Investigator Award. They give about 34 a year, but if you happen to be doing research that's of interest to the Navy, that might be a place to go. Air Force has their own Young Investigator program. DARPA has their Young Investigator, Young Faculty Award. Department of Energy has an Early Career Award. NIH has a New Innovator Award. So you can see there's a lot of different ones. And then even within NSF, some parts of NSF will have their own kind of different types of awards, maybe for people even a little bit earlier than most of the career PIs will be, to help you maybe in your first year or so. And so, for example, the Computer Science Directorate has their Research Initiation Awards. Engineering Education has a Research Initiation Award. So that, even within NSF, there may be some other programs that you might want to consider. And then foundations, professional societies, American Chemical Society has their New Investigator Award, grants. Beckman has Young Investigator grants. Many others do. So again, if you have a particular funder that you think is really interested in the kind of research you do, then look to see if they don't have a grant program that's particularly for early career folks. Okay. Now, there is also, and I'm mentioning this just to avoid confusion, there is also with NIH, National Institutes of Health has what they call Career Development Awards, okay? So, and they're called K Awards or K Grants. That is really a different animal because those are for mentor, a lot of them are for people who are at transition. So if you're a postdoc going into a faculty position, or if you are somebody who's a clinician and you want to move into research, or if you are someone who has a particular kind of background in biomedical research, but you want to go into a different area. That's what these awards are for. And usually you need to choose a mentor. Okay, so that's a really different kind of application. So if that very well might be something that fits you, if you're doing research of interest to NIH, if that's the case, go to this link, the K kiosk, and you can take a little quiz, and they will kind of tell you which there's a whole lot of K awards, which ones might apply to you. But most of what I'm saying here is not necessarily going to apply to the K awards because, like I said, it's a whole different animal. They require that you have a special training program for yourself to try to move into this new line of research. They expect mentors. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these more standalone proposals for early career researchers who are independent researchers already. Okay. All right. So for any of those early career kinds of grants, they first thing, if you're looking at one that you're thinking about whether you want to apply, look at the eligibility requirements because they vary all over the place. So for some of them, like the NSF Career, it doesn't matter how long it's been since your PhD, as long as you're an assistant professor. Okay. For others, you can be an associate professor. So for DARPA Young Faculty Award, you can be associate professor. For some, you can only be so many years, away from your terminal degree. So your PhD or MD sometimes. Okay. So it will vary. Sometimes you have to be a citizen. Sometimes you don't have to be a citizen. So make sure you're eligible first. Okay. Understand the application requirements in general. So a lot of times they will have additional application requirements beyond what a standard grant to that funder would be. And that's because this is a special type of grant. It has a special purpose. And the purpose is to choose those people that this funder is going to want to support and thinks they will be funding in the future. So a lot of times there may be requirements that have more to do with explaining, okay, where are you going and where do you see yourself and how is your research relevant to what we are interested in? Okay. They want, you want to be sure that you understand the agency of program. So you can't just write one proposal and then try to send it out to, NSF Career and Department of Defense, Young Investigator, or, DOE Early Career. They're all different. You got to make the argument to the particular audience that you're targeting. So you need to make sure that you understand that audience. And that's going to be the program officers and the reviewers for that particular funder. Okay. And then in general, these proposals are going to be a little bit different because you do need to talk about where is your long-term research agenda going? What are those plans are, and how do they align with the interests of the agency? And then for NSF, you also have to talk about your education and outreach plans. And so we'll talk a lot more about that, but that is a little bit different than maybe if you just have an idea for a great project, and you can write a proposal for that. But for these early career kinds of proposals, it's a lot about you as well as about the kind of research you're doing and the particular project you're proposing. And that can vary even, some of them are even more about you than the project. So it just depends, particularly for professional associations and some private foundations. So this is where you need to do your own research, talk to people who've been funded, see if you can get a successful proposal to look at that will help you understand exactly what that particular funder is looking for. Okay. So in general, you want to be very clear about where your research is going, your line of scholarship. What are you trying to do? And then you are going to propose a project for this kind of grant that has clear outcomes, but it needs to be part of something that's going to go on in the future. It's setting you up for this really exciting line of research that the funder is going to be interested in. So that means you're going to have to put your project in context. What is it you've already done that positions you to be the right person to do this project? And then what's going to come out of this project? Then where is it going to lead? And then ultimately, why is it that this line of scholarship is something this funder is going to be excited to support and help you get a quick start on? Okay. So when you're thinking about your long-term research agenda, you need to be clear about that. Be able to express that in maybe one sentence. What is it that you're trying to do over the next 10, 15 years? What are the big questions you're trying to answer, the big need you're trying to address, the big challenge in your field that you want to, to address? Okay. It needs to be at the cutting edge. So usually in order to get, these reviewers excited, it needs to be kind of sexy, kind of at the leading edge of your field. You don't want to be proposing something that's kind of, okay, it's good research, but it's sort of been done. It's not really, it's not really that new, because that's hard to get reviewers excited, because again, they're not just investing in this one project, but in where you're going in the future. So if you're kind of in this area that's been researched for 10, 15 years, and you're not doing something that's really new, then it's hard to get them to want to invest in you. Okay. You do have to think about being an independent researcher. So you want to be kind of separated from if you're relatively recently, kind of out of grad school or out of a postdoc, you want to be careful not to be just kind of appearing to continue to do the same work. Yet you have to build on what you've already done. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Okay. It needs to be something you care about, because obviously, you're telling them this is where you're going with your life, your professional life. So it needs to be something that you would actually be happy if you were awarded the grant. And then you do have to think about, can you make the argument that you are positioned to be successful? So that a lot of times means you have to have some publications in the area, and you have to have preliminary data. So we'll talk a lot more about that. But no matter how wonderful the proposal is that you write, if you don't have any publications in that topic, it's going to be hard for you to convince the reviewers that you actually are qualified to do the work. So it may be that you're not quite ready, we'll talk about that. Maybe you need to take a little time to get those publications out. Okay. And, obviously when you're choosing a research agenda, you need to understand who's going to want to fund it. Okay. Okay. So I would say, just as an exercise, a homework exercise, if you're not sure what your long-term research agenda is, we did this in another workshop, so I won't ask you to do it again, but think about, actually describing to somebody, what is your long-term research agenda? What is it with the need you're addressing? Why does it matter? What's your general approach? And be able to do that in less than 5 minutes and write it down in maybe a sentence. Okay, so this is what you're going to be using to help introduce yourself in your proposal, and it's going to put your project in context. So this is where I see myself going, and this is not a paragraph. Usually this might be a sentence or two to kind of, again, orient your reviewer, explain, okay, this is where I'm going with this, and now this is the project I'm proposing as a significant step along that trajectory. Okay. Okay, so let's think about the NSF career. Okay, so the NSF career is a particular kind of grant that NSF provides to early career faculty. These are the links, and as I said earlier, and I'll put this in here for people who just joined us in the chat. You can download all these slides using the link in the chat. Okay, this is the link to the program page, the solicitation, the FAQs, and so forth. That it is due towards the end of July every year. So if you're not ready to submit this year, it'll come around again next year and the year after that. Okay, it's this year it's due July 26th. So it's usually toward the end of July. Okay. In order to be eligible for the career, you need to be untenured on the proposal due date. So on that July 26th, as long as you don't officially have tenure, you could have put in your packet, you could be ready to apply, anything like that, that's fine. But just as long as you don't officially have tenure, you're eligible. Okay. And that means even if, like, once you put in your proposal and you get awarded and by then you have tenure, that's totally fine. Again, just as long as you're not tenured when you put in the proposal. You need to be on the tenure track or equivalent. So if you are not tenure track, but you are in what you would consider a permanent position, is not a postdoc or a position where you're only there for a year or two and you're probably going to move on, then you may be eligible. So there is all this information in the FAQs in that prior slide, in the solicitation, that will tell you whether you might possibly be eligible. But if you are tenure track, you don't have to worry about it. Okay. And you have to be an assistant professor or equivalent. So you cannot be an associate professor without tenure. You have to have the title assistant professor. Okay. And you get 3 tries. Okay, so you have 3 tries to put in your career for the NSF career. Now, for other agencies, the rules are different, but for NSF, that's the way that's the rules they have. So that means you have to kind of think about, well, what makes sense? Because usually you might have 5 or 6 years when you would be eligible, right? Your first year and then on until you officially get awarded tenure. So you have to kind of be a little strategic to figure out how you want to use your 3 tries. And we'll talk more about how you decide. Should I apply now? Should I wait, not use my try now? Should I use my try now and then see what the reviews are? And then maybe I can take a year to address the reviews. And then, so there's all these different ways you might do it, but it is something you want to really be thoughtful about. You don't want to just kind of shoot off a career proposal if you're not ready, because now you've blown one of your tries and you may have a better chance to get a better proposal done if you had waited a year. Okay. Another big thing about the career, and this is true for about many of these early career kinds of grants, not all, but many, is that it's a single PI grant. So it's all about you. Okay, you can have collaborators, you can have what they call senior personnel, which is a faculty level person who's going to help you in a relatively constrained way, but you cannot have co-PIs. So a co-PI would be somebody who is really working with you as part of a team, where they, are significantly involved throughout the whole proposal and helping you with doing various tasks or doing things that are then going to feed into what you're doing. Those are great kinds of projects that NSF loves to fund, but not for career. Okay, you would put those in under another kind of grant, because the whole point of career is it's all about you. It's all about helping you really get a fast start on your research, getting, getting a bunch of publications under your belt, and they don't want it to be about a team. Okay, so this can be a challenge for some people. If you are doing something that's innately a team kind of research area, if you're doing multidisciplinary research where you work in a team, then you have to kind of decide, is this the right kind of grant for me? Is there a way I can carve out a project that would be just me and maybe a little bit of collaboration, or is this just not going to work for me? Okay, and of course you need to be doing research that's of interest to NSF. right? And that's true for any other agency. If you're going for the Office of Naval Research Young Investigator, you're going to NASA, if you're going to NIH, it obviously you need to be doing research of interest to those agencies. Okay. All right, so NSF funds research in physical life and natural sciences, social behavioral and economic sciences, computer science, and engineering, and STEM education and learning. And they do, fund careers in all those areas. So it is a really broad. That is, one reason, in addition to the fact they give so many out every year, that is one reason we really focus on career, because so many people are eligible because they fund so many different areas. Now, obviously, if you are doing STEM research in STEM education, the kind of proposal you're going to write, what the reviewer is going to look for, it's going to be totally different than if you're doing biology, right? Research. So there are going to be a lot of discipline specific kind of requirements and differences among proposals, but I'm going to focus on kind of what is common on these things. But it certainly is helpful to talk to your colleagues, and particularly if you have any colleagues who've been funded just for NSF in general in your field, or a career, or if they've reviewed for NSF in your field, talk to them, because a lot of times they can give you that more specific information that might be relevant to what you're doing. Okay. Big thing NSF does not fund research in is arts and humanities, except if it's related to STEM. Okay. And human disease and treatment, but they sort of do. So this is where you have to be careful. So if you're doing research that's related to human disease and treatment, you have to be careful how you frame it. Okay. And that is because NSF is very sensitive about funding something they feel NIH should fund, because NIH has a much larger budget than NSF does. So NSF is sort of, protecting their budget for those things that NIH won't fund. And so that means there are actually a lot of areas of research in engineering, in biology, in computer science, and big data, in social science, in behavioral science, all those things that have relevance for human disease and treatment, but you have to be very careful how you describe it. Okay, when you're going to NSF, so it does not look like an NIH proposal. And I will talk more about that. But if you are doing research that is relevant to human disease treatment, just be very careful how you frame it. Okay. The other thing they do not fund is development. And this is something a lot of people will get in trouble with. And I've talked about this in the last webinar I did was about NSF. I'm just going to belabor this here because a lot of people make this mistake in the career proposal. So I want to make sure that you are careful, that you frame your research as fundamental research, not development. Okay, so what is fundamental research? That means research that advances the frontiers of your discipline. Okay, so it's where you are generating new knowledge. You're plugging gaps in your field. You're usually doing something that might be hypothesis-based, depending on your field. You may be, if you're in a more applied field, so for example, computer science, some parts of engineering, you're addressing fundamental challenges. You may have a particular application in mind, but that's motivating those fundamental challenges, right? You are not focused on one application usually, right? You're saying, okay, for example, there are these issues with water treatment, right? And the reason that we cannot do water treatment in this particular way is we don't understand X. I'm going to work on X, okay? But you're focusing in again on that fundamental knowledge, not on developing a specific water treatment method, because then it becomes too applied, and usually then a lot of times they will call it development. So that's where you have to be careful, okay? So this is where, if it's development, it means I am using established procedures and methods just for a new application. So I know we have all this technology. Now I'm going to develop a better water treatment filter, right? That is not considered research at NSF. That's considered development at NSF. And so you have to be careful. Now, a lot of people actually can frame their research as fundamental research. They're just so used to writing things in terms of the outcomes that they say, I'm going to develop a new pedagogical method. I'm going to develop a new water treatment method. I'm going to develop a new app, right? And they don't really talk about what the fundamental advances are that they're making. And that's how a lot of times they will get in trouble. So you just want to be very careful about that. So ask yourself, Does my research have applications? That's NSF. Okay. Am I researching a specific application? And the new knowledge is going to only apply basically to that application. That will kill you at NSF. So this is a lot of times framing. It may be your project, too, if you are really clearly doing something totally applied. It also will vary by the particular program, the particular disciplinary area that you're focusing on. Some areas are more inherently applied than others. So the barge is varied depending on those things. So again, this is where you just want to be aware, talk to your colleagues, talk to your mentors, talk to your program officer if you're not sure. All right, if you do get a career, you get 5 years of funding. You get a minimum of $400,000 over those 5 years. That includes your indirect, so that includes overhead, okay? Except if you're going to the Biological Sciences Directorate, the Engineering Directorate, or Polar Programs, in which case it's a minimum of 500,000. So a lot of people will think minimum, right? Usually a grant programs are the maximum. You can only ask for X amount. In this case, you can't ask for less, you can ask for more. Okay, so the reason they do that is the upper levels of NSF do not want the program officers who are kind of at the lower levels who are making the decisions. They don't want them to whittle down on the amount of the award so they can give more out. That's the temptation to the program officers. They love, they'll see lots of great ideas and they want to fund a lot of them. So they think, oh, maybe if I could cut this down to 350K, then I could fund this extra project. They don't want to do that. They want it to stay at least significant. So that's why there's a minimum. But for you as a PI, that adds another level of ambiguity because different parts of NSF fund careers at different levels. So some parts fund, for example, biological sciences, they fund fewer careers, but they fund them sometimes at over $1 million. And part of that is because biology is really expensive, right? Some parts engineering and some parts of engineering fund right at that minimum 500,000 because they want to fund a bunch. So you have to do your own research to figure out, okay, my part of NSF, what is the customary amount I can ask for? So that's another thing that usually you're told how much you can ask for, and now you got to figure it out. Okay. The big thing, as you kind of probably have gathered, is you are applying for a career as a type of grant, like a flavor of grant, but you're applying to a particular program within NSF that funds your topic. Okay, so your audience is that program. Even though you're applying to career, you're not applying to one program officer who is a career program officer. You're applying to your program officer in your disciplinary area, and I'll talk a little more about that later. Okay. Okay, so in general, if it's always helpful to know what is the funder trying to accomplish. And as I mentioned earlier, for all of these kinds of grants, the funder is trying to nurture the next generation of researchers that they want to fund, right? And then in NSF's, case, they want kind of combinations of researchers and educators. Okay, people who are both. Okay, but the other thing they're trying to do is change academic culture. And this is just specific to NSF. They want faculty, then kind of the next generation of faculty, to integrate education and research, to reach out beyond the university, to engage stakeholders, to engage younger students, to engage people in their research, to broaden participation, right, of people in your field. So they're really wanting to reward those faculty who are interested in that and get them started on that path early in their careers, that they're not only doing research, they're also doing education, and they're making those two things really support each other, that those are two things are synergistic. And we'll talk about how to do that. But as a result, they ask not only for a research plan, but also an education plan. Okay, so that is really where you're going to end up kind of having to both talk about research and education and how they're integrated. Okay. So someone was asking to where to find those videos of the prior workshops, and I will let I guess Shonda and Kim can talk about that and can reply to that on the chat. Okay, so NSF, I talked about this on the last workshop. You know, NSF is organized into directorates. Each directorate is organized into divisions. Each division is organized into core programs. And again, I went into a lot of detail on that in the last workshop, just on NSF. But this, you know, the big thing is you've got to drill down to the core program, and that is where you're going to apply. Okay, so you have to figure out which fits you. And then, as I said earlier, you know, each part of NSF sort of does things differently in terms of career. And so, you know, this is the latest numbers that are available. NSF stopped publishing these numbers after 2017. So, but you can see the variation. So the blue is how many career proposals were received. The red are how many were funded. The percent is the funding rate, the success rate. So you can see it varies a lot. And these are sort of clues to how different parts of NSF kind of do things differently. You can see engineering funds a whole lot, but then they get a whole lot, right? So their funding rate is not that, you know, is not that much any higher than most of the other ones. Geosciences, look at that, 25%. Well, the reason for that is geosciences tends to tell their PIs, we want you to get a regular proposal first before you put in a career. So they're kind of already filtering people who put in their geoscience. So that, again, that's the value of talking to your program officer. Education and human resources, this is changing. They are really wanting to fund more education research careers. It's just that and I think they probably have now, since we just have older numbers right here, but they are looking for careers that they can fund. But the challenge is for education research, it tends to be a more team focused discipline. And so you have to kind of figure out if you can come up with a project where you can be the, you know, the kind of the sole investigator. Okay. All right. The big thing is, as I said, you're eligible to apply three times, as long as you're, you know, or you know, you can apply 3 times as long as you're eligible. So as long as you haven't gotten tenure, right? So generally people don't get funded on the first time. Some do, but generally you want to just don't count on getting funded the first time. Usually it's hard to write a really great proposal on your idea the first time. You know, it takes a while to think things through. You need feedback from the reviewers. So just think of this as a 3 proposal process. Okay. As you go along, your application is going to get stronger. As you get reviews back, as you keep working on your ideas, as you get more publications out, all of that will make you more, you know, a stronger competitor, a stronger PI. So, you know, kind of, again, even if you put in your proposal, the first time you put it in, you're going to get harsh reviews, which is not uncommon at all. Just remember, this is part of helping you to figure out, okay, what your next steps should be. And don't feel like it's you know, necessarily telling you you need to give up. Okay. So in general, you want to learn from your reviews and then think about how you're going to, you know, kind of go forward. All right. So the career development plan that they're asking you for in the career is to build a firm foundation for a lifetime of integrated contributions to research and education. Okay, so really, again, this is all about not just the project you're proposing, kind of, but where it's going to go. So you're going to have a research plan, an integrated education plan, and you want to talk about how they're integrated, and we'll talk more about that. But in general, what they're saying here is they want them to be related and to support each other. Okay, so it should not be that you have something that's totally different that you're doing in education than what you're doing in research. It does not mean that if you're working on quantum physics that you have to, you know, teach high schoolers about quantum physics. You know, you can do it at the level that's appropriate for them, but it needs to be related to physics and the type of research you're doing. Okay. You are also required to have a departmental letter. So that's a letter from usually your department head who will talk about how they're supporting you, how they're mentoring you, you know, voicing support for both your education and research plan that you're proposing. So that is an important part of the career, and reviewers really look at that. Okay. So sometimes people are kind of a little bit, you know, kind of confused. Should I go for an NSF career or should I put in a regular proposal to NSF? Okay. So I want to kind of contrast those. The regular proposal or the core proposal, or sometimes it's called a disciplinary proposal. That's the investigator initiated mechanism where you apply to the same program, disciplinary program, but it doesn't have all the same constraints. So let's talk about that. Okay. So if you put in a proposal for a career and you win it, you get 5 years of funding. Okay. Most regular proposals, the core proposals, are 2 or 3. years. It's up to you. You have a lot of flexibility there. Okay. Typically 400,000 and up, right? For a career, it's going to be less for the core, depending on the project. Okay. Um, in a career, you're only competing with other early career faculty. So that's a big advantage. You're not competing with those PIs who've been funded by NSF for the last 20 years. Okay, and have that 100-page CV. You're all kind of in the same place, although they still expect you to have publications. They still expect you to have some sort of track record, but obviously it can be a lot, lower level than if you were, a senior researcher. Okay, if you're going and put a regular proposal, you're going to be competing with senior faculty. So that's the challenge. Now, for the NSF career, you can't have any co-PIs. As I said earlier, for the regular, you can have co-PIs. So sometimes, as I said earlier, your research just is interdisciplinary. You need to have co-PIs or you have a project in mind that just requires co-PIs. Just go ahead and put in a regular proposal in that case. Don't try to shoehorn this project into a career and just not mention that you have co-PIs, even though you do, because it's not going to make sense to the reviewers. So, you just have to find the project that fits the funding mechanism that you're pursuing. Okay. NSF career requires an extensive education and outreach component. Okay, the bar is a lot higher for career. For any NSF proposal, you're going to have education and outreach, but the bar is a lot lower for the regular proposal. If you win a career, you are eligible for the Presidential Excellence Award, which is, assuming that all the other requirements are satisfied, but they are, this is obviously very prestigious, and you're put in the pool for that. If you win a career, if you win a regular grant, you're not. Okay. So all of those things can help you decide, okay, should I put in a regular proposal? Should I put in a career? And you may have more than one. You might put in a regular proposal with a colleague on one idea and put in a career, on another one. So you have lots of options. You just have to find the right fit for the project you have in mind. Okay, so let's talk about planning. Okay, so first of all, before you start writing, you need to choose your career idea. What is it I'm going to do if I get funded? What am I proposing in terms of my research? Okay. Um, Translate that idea into a clear project with a specific goal, specific objectives, specific research questions or hypotheses or challenges or gaps, specific outcomes and approach. So, you need to really flesh it out before you go and talk to your program officer if you can, right? Then figure out, okay, which program does this fit? And obviously there may be some iteration there. You want to find, potential programs and then kind of make sure your project is framed in a way that fits a program that is one that you can apply to at NSF. Then talk to your program officer about your project. Okay, and then get more feedback. Does this fit their program? Is this what they're looking for? Are there some things you need to be aware of? Okay. Choose your education outreach ideas, and this does not necessarily have to be sequential. You can be doing that as you're working on your research ideas, okay? And plan what you're going to do for education outreach. Recruit your collaborators if you need any. Talk to your department chair or department head. Let them know that you're going to be putting in a career. You're going to need a letter from them. Talk to them about what your ideas are so that make sure they support that. Talk to your pre-award office. Let them know you're planning to put in a career, because remember, one due date for everybody at your institution and everybody in the country, right? So you do not want to wait to the last minute to submit, because you're doing this through a portal on the internet, and you know how that goes, right? So, and also your poor pre-award office may be dealing with everybody's budgets and everybody's bio sketches and all that sort of stuff. So they're going to tell you when they need things, and you're going to want to put that in your schedule. Okay. And then line up colleagues and people who know NSF, people who are in your field and who are representative of the kind of reviewers you expect to get. So maybe people are not exactly in your subfield if you think you're going to get reviewers like that. And ask them if they'd be willing to read a draft and kind of review it as a reviewer would. Okay. So you might want to do that now, knowing and telling them, I'm going to have a draft in mid-June, right? Would you be willing to read it? Okay, then if they say, yeah, I could do that, then they will put it on their calendar. You put it on your calendar. June 15th, I'm going to send them a pretty good draft. That's my deadline. And then they will give you that feedback, and you have a whole month then to, to respond to whatever their comments are and their suggestions are. So but the thing you want to do is ask them now, if you're planning to submit, obviously this July, because you'll get on their calendar. If you wait until you have a good draft, it's usually going to be too late to get, because everybody's busy or they're out of town or they've already agreed to review other people's proposals. And then using that, schedule your proposal writing, right? So all the things, when are you going to get various, iterations of your drafts done? When are you going to have that good draft to send to your colleagues? When are you going to get your bio sketch and all your budget, all that sort of stuff, and come up with a plan? Okay. When you're selecting your research idea, just remember it needs to be something you want to do that kind of, again, is in line with that big green arrow where you think you're going, and make sure it contributes to your career goals. Okay, is this really what I want to do? And in general, the big difference about career or even other young investigator kind of grants and choosing your topic is that it's not just about, as I said earlier, it's not just about the one project, the 5-year project that you're going to get funded. It is about where it will lead. Right. So that, now, on one hand, that means you have to think of something that is, again, going to lead to more research that's going to help you, kind of, again, on this larger agenda that you have. On the other hand, that means you don't have to do everything in one project. Okay. So a lot of times what happens is people are overly ambitious in what they're proposing to do because they have this big gap, grad challenge they're focused on, and they think that they have to basically solve that problem in that 5-year project. And what comes back a lot of times from reviewers is, there's no way you can do this, right? This is too much. Okay, so you can always keep in mind that if you can make a significant contribution to a particular gap in your field, to addressing a particular challenge, there can still be future other challenges that are important, that are related, and you can just say, look, the next step will be this will set me up for this next step. And that's not a bug, that's a feature in terms of the career. So you can really, kind of be thoughtful about what is going to be a significant outcome for this project, but not necessarily, going to solve all the problems for a particular need or particular application or gap. So this is, again, where a lot of times talking to your colleagues can help you. Bouncing your ideas off of your more senior colleagues can help you kind of gauge, am I being overly ambitious? Is my scope too broad? Or am I proposing something that reviewers will actually believe I can do? All right, so I have been talking about your research agenda as if it were one line. Now, in real life, that's probably not the case. As you finished your postdoc or your PhD, and you in one area, you may very well want to go off in another area to, kind of establish yourself independently from your advisor. It may be that you're doing research in a very dynamic disciplinary area, and things change all the time. So you may want to go off in a new, more promising area. It may be you got some really interesting results and you want to go off in a new area. Okay. The question I get from people a lot of times is, well, I have all my publications in this area. I can continue, or I may want to continue that, but it's not as exciting, right? So there's this new area that I could branch off onto, but I don't have any publications in that area yet. So what should I do for my career? Okay, so what you want to think about here is, can you convince your reviewers that what you've done here in in your previous work, your publications, your dissertation, whatever, will set you up for success in this new area? It may be that you can say, look, I'm using the same method. Now I'm applying it in this new context. That's great. It's going to, I'm bringing something new to the table in this area. That may be fine. It may be that you don't really have, there's some gaps, right? There's some methods that you don't have, any track record in. There may be some backgrounds you don't have. You may be able to just say, I have a collaborator who's going to fill that gap, as long as it's a really discrete gap. It's not co-PI level collaborator. It's somebody who's going to do one specific thing for you. Then you may be able to do that. Or it may be that you are just not ready here. You need to be working on getting some publications out, going to the right conferences, presenting at the right, post-pandemic, presenting at the right sessions so that those, these folks are going to see you. This is a really different crowd than this other area, in which case maybe you want to continue. If you put in your career, you might want to put in career in your more established area. If the reviewers are kind of like, not that exciting, then by the time the following year, maybe you're ready and to jump over to this new area. And people do that all the time. So this is a judgment call, but a lot of times you can think about this just from the perspective of a reviewer. If you were a reviewer reading this and looking at what you've already done, would you be confident that this PI, has the background, has the, oops, has the has the skills to be successful with this. Okay. All right. So once you've kind of, figured this out, you want to think about where you fit within NSF. And I'm not going to go into detail on this because I went into a lot of detail in the last webinar, which is available to you. Okay. So it goes in and steps you through figuring out which program within NSF would fit you. But just suffice to say, again, you have to kind of, in fact, I will pull this up. So you have to dig down below the directorate level and below the division level to the program level. So for example, let's say that you are, let's say you're in engineering, okay? And so directorate for engineering is probably maybe where you wanna go. The division is chemical, bioengineering, and so forth, okay? Programs are here. So I have to decide, am I in interfacial engineering or electrochemical systems, right? Maybe it could be one of those, right? So then I can look at that, and then I go through and I read the description of what they fund, and there's a program officer at the top. There's a link at the bottom that shows that I can look at to see what has been funded out of this program. Okay, so that's what you're going to have to figure out. And again, I go into a lot more detail in this in the uh, the uh, uh, the last webinar, so I don't want to repeat because I imagine a lot of you saw that. But in general, now, if you are though doing something that might fit in more than one program, you can apply to more than one program. And what will happen if they both like your idea, then they will share funding of it. So that is something you can do, but talk to your program officer first, okay, about that. Okay. All right, and then, think about, are you ready to apply? How long do you have till tenure, right? So how many years of eligibility do you have left? If it's only 3 left, maybe you want to just go ahead and apply, because you're going to lose that chance anyway. If you are just starting off as a faculty member, you really want to think, am I really ready? Do I want to burn one of my chances right now? Okay. And then, if you're early, if this is your first year, really think hard about this, because a lot of times you're not quite, you're not set up. If you're doing a laboratory research area, you probably may not have your lab set up, especially with COVID. You may not, you may not have actually done much teaching yet. So you don't really know what your needs of your students are yet. You may not really know what's going on at Prairie View that you can link to for your education component. So there are a lot of reasons to kind of be cautious if this is your first year. Not that there are some people who are ready to apply in their first year, but just really think about this, because you do have at least 5 years of eligibility, and you may want to wait. Okay. And then think about, your preliminary data. Okay. Also think about where you are in your idea. So you have an idea, you kind of decide, this is what I want to do. Are you still in the exploratory phase? Are you still just like dipping your toe in the water in this idea, right? Are you trying to say, if I do X, what happens, right? I had this great idea, but let me, see what happens. That is usually too early for a career. Okay. If you're doing something where you're just kind of trying to assess, I want to measure something, I want to see how big it is, how many of it, how irregular is it, all that sort of stuff. That is called descriptive research, right? And this is a normal part of, the development of your ideas, coming up with hypotheses, but usually this is going to be your preliminary results, right? If you are at this stage and you try to propose a career, they're going to say, you're not ready, right? We want to see mechanistic hypotheses, or we want to see your research questions, or if you're in a field where maybe what are your challenges that you're addressing that are going to be a big contribution if you can address them to your field. And usually, if you are not at that point, that it's going to be very difficult, one, for you to write up a 5-year project, right? Because you're kind of still trying to figure all this stuff out. So you probably want to wait. And also, usually they want to see that you have really thought this through and have enough preliminary results to motivate that mechanistic hypothesis or the research questions or discussion of the fundamental challenges. Okay, and some evidence that you can do what you say you're going to do. Okay, so people will ask, well, okay, I have to have preliminary data. How much do I need? Well, it will vary by discipline. If you're in a laboratory discipline, if you're in a field discipline, usually they want to see more preliminary data than if you're something that's more theoretical. Okay, how risky is your idea? If you're proposing this crazy idea that it would be it would really change things if you were successful, but it's kind of out of the box, then obviously they're going to be a lot more suspicious. Reviewers tend to be conservative. They want to see some evidence, or quite a bit of evidence to show, yeah, you can do this. So they're going to expect more preliminary data. Okay, compared to something that maybe, is not that risky, where maybe you've already done some of that. So if you have a strong track record in doing something, then you're probably not going to need as much preliminary data than if you are, for example, going off in a new direction where you're using a new methods. That's where you might have to show preliminary data. So all of this will help you decide, okay, am I ready, or do I need to kind of wait a little bit? And then, of course, one big one is, do you have any potential showstoppers where you're saying, okay, I'm going to do this step, all right, and then I'm going to use that for the next thing, right? And if that step is a little bit like nobody's done this before, you've never done it before, it looks risky, and it is also, if you can't do it, then the rest of your project is blown out of the water. That is really important that you get preliminary data on that. You do calculations, you do experiments, you do something to show, yeah, I can do this. And that also applies for logistical things. So let's say you're doing a social science research where you need access to a particular population and you don't have that access yet. They're going to question you, right? You say you're going to be working with, this population of women and domestic violence victims in homeless shelters, right? How are you going to do that? You say you're going to track them for 3 years, right? Have you ever done that before? That's the kind of thing, again, where reviewers will start looking at, do you have the track record? Is there some evidence that you can be successful? Okay, so you need preliminary data to get funding. You need funding to get preliminary data. So what do? This is where the eager can be really helpful. And I did talk about this last time, but just quickly, the eager is a special grant for early concept, kind of exploratory research. So it's to help you actually get funding for, that kind of preliminary data to generate it, so then you can go on and get a career. You do need to get the okay of your program officer to apply. It's reviewed internally, so that might be something to think about if you are in that position where you need funding to get your preliminary data in order to be competitive. Okay, and then you want to plan your career project. So once you've identified that program, remember, it needs to be 5 years, it needs to be single PI. You need to have clear outcomes. It can't just be a step along that big green arrow. Okay, so that's important. And then develop your project story. So develop, okay, what are my goals? Okay, what am I going to accomplish at the end? How's the world going to be different after I spend this $500,000 or $400,000, right? What is the new knowledge I'm going to generate? How am I advancing the field? Okay, how am I going to do it? Clear objectives or aims, and then what's going to come out of it. So just even being able to write 3 paragraphs describing this story will then position you to approach your program officer with enough detail they can give you helpful feedback. Now, as you plan this, remember that for NSF, it's the National Science Foundation. So they are all about the new knowledge. You really need to be able to identify, not just I am going to generate kind of data. I'm going to collect information, but what questions are you trying to answer? What hypotheses that are important in your field are you trying to address? And is this going to excite the reviewers in the program you've identified? So this is where, kind of going back to this issue for any of you who are doing research that might have applications to human disease and treatment. Remember, for National Science Foundation, you want to think about your program. So for example, if you are doing something that has to do with bioengineering and tissue scaffolding, for example, remember this is in the engineering directorate. That program is in the engineering directorate. Your reviewers will be engineers. Okay, so even though tissue scaffolding is wonderful, it has all these great applications in terms of developing new ways to treat various diseases and various problems. Don't focus on that in the new knowledge. Focus on the engineering, the bioengineering challenges, the bioengineering hypotheses. Really dig deep into the fundamentals that are going to excite those engineering, they're bioengineers probably, reviewers. Okay, so always think about, okay, who's your audience, and then how can you make this pitch in terms of the new knowledge, the gaps, the research questions you're answering, the challenges you're overcoming that will really excite those folks. If you're going to biological sciences, think about these are going to be fundamental biologists. If it's cell biology, you want to talk about understanding of the cell. Again, not I'm going to, help cure cancer by understanding these various things that, of how cells metastasize. No, we don't understand this particular thing of how a cell works. That's the new knowledge. The broader impacts, the application will be potentially in, that it could be used for cancer, it could be used for this, it could be used for that. But again, be careful about how you frame it. Okay, so in general, think about what are the scientific barriers? Why can't we do this now? What are your specific research questions or hypotheses? All of that is important in addressing, what that intellectual merit is. That's what really that new knowledge is all about, intellectual merit, and how is what you're doing different from what other people who are working the same problem are doing. Okay, and then talk to your program officer. Okay. This is really important in terms of making sure you have the right program, getting feedback on your project. Ask them about the kind of typical range of backgrounds of reviewers on the panel, so you know what you have to explain and what you can assume they know. It's important for them to know you're putting in a career, and it can help you just develop a good relationship with the program officer. They really want you to contact them, so don't make the mistake of being too shy to contact your program officer. Okay, so how do you do that? Send them a short email asking for a phone or Zoom discussion. Is there a time we can talk? Then describe briefly in your email under that just those 3 paragraphs or so of your project idea. And then hopefully you can have a discussion and ask them all these things about the fit. Is this the right place? How is it going to be reviewed? All those kinds of things. Okay. Then plan your education plan. Okay. Think about what are your interests, what fits your institution, your department, your students. This is really important for NSF, figuring out, okay, how is it that you're actually advancing education and outreach in your field that's related to your research. So remember, NSF funds, your project from taxpayer money. Okay. And a big part of what NSF is trying to accomplish, one of their missions is to educate the next generation of scientists and engineers, and to make sure the citizenry is what do they call it? Scientifically knowledgeable, not scientifically literate, I think is what they say. And, to serve all people, right? Serve everybody who's putting that taxpayer money in. So that's what you're kind of trying to do. You can decide what makes sense depending on your research. One big thing, though, they are very focused on is broadening to participation. So you are an HBCU. That is a wonderful, opportunity for you, but that's not enough. So you can't just say, hey, I'm at HBCU, fund me. Okay, that's not enough. You got to say, I'm at an HBCU. Now, let me tell you how I'm going to leverage that. Right? You have access to all, a lot of African American future scientists and engineers. You have access to, high schoolers and community college and other students who may want to come to Prairie View. You have, there's all these things you can do with them. But again, it is about what you're going to do, not just that you're at an institution. If you are a member of a minority group, if you're a Black, if you're a woman in a mainly male field, if you are a Hispanic, if you are veteran, if you are disabled or whatever, you can also talk about that. Don't be shy about mentioning that. But again, it's in the context of how am I going to leverage that? Right? I am, there's all this literature showing that it's helpful to younger students, especially, to see people who look like them being in, a profession like an engineer or scientist, right? So you can talk about how you're going to make sure that that happens, right? So but again, it's not just, hey, I'm a woman in a male field. I'm a Black person in a mainly white field. Fund me. It's I am, this is my identity. Now, how am I going to leverage it? So you've got both of those things going for you. If you're not in minority, that's fine. You can also, again, talk about how you're going to leverage the, all the things that are going on at Prairie View, as well as the demographics of your students, and all in order to, help these students be more interested in science, to persist in science, to maybe go on to grad school, or whatever you decide you want is your goal. The big thing with the education component is you just think of it in the same way you would your research plan. So make it kind of parallel. It's not going to be as long, but this is not about community service. Oh yeah, I'm going to go talk to second graders for 12 hours over the next 5 years to talk about quantum physics so I can get my career grant. It is about a project, just as your research is a project, right? So you have goals, you have objectives. There's something you're trying to do in terms of broadening participation, improving, reaching out to stakeholders, improving the way you educate your first year students, whatever it is you see is the need. It does need to connect with your research, but a lot of times that can be an easy connection, but then you have a clear plan for what you're going to do with clear outcomes and an impact. Okay. You can target lots of different populations. It could be undergrads, could be underrepresented students at various levels, could be high school students, it could be community college students, it could be middle school, it could be K-12 teachers, it could be your community, it could be stakeholders in your research, it could be policymakers who are going to use your research, again, depending on your field, could be practitioners in your field, it could be other faculty, lots of different things. Just depends on what you think is important and what makes sense for your research. Okay. Big thing though, I would say, is don't try to just throw everything, like throwing pasta at the wall to see what sticks. A lot of times people will propose like 6 different things, but that, you wouldn't do that with your research. Say, oh, I'm going to research this, I'm going to research that, I'm going to say, which one do you like? Hopefully you'll fund me. It's the same thing here. You won't choose one main thing you want to do that's kind of interesting and different. Okay, what is it that's not different? Okay, most people will say, I am going to develop a new course that's based on my research idea, right? A lot of times graduate course, or maybe an undergrad, or a module to go in my undergraduate class based on this research that I'm doing. They say reviewers used to be impressed by that now they say that's your job. You don't get any points for that. Okay, I'm going to have undergrads working on in my lab, or working on this research project. That's expected. Again, if you don't, you're going to get demerits, but you're not going to get points. Okay. The other thing people say is, I am going to do some very limited outreach. Maybe we have a tour every year for the community, and I'm going to let people tour my lab. And they're like, 1 day a year, you're going to let people in your lab. How much difference is that going to make? Okay. So that's what you don't want to do. Right. And so there are some examples in that link, and I'm going to put it in here one more time, where you can download the slides, but there are examples that I have annotated of really well-reviewed education components that you can look at, and you can see what they're doing there is they have a clear motivation. They're talking about why they're doing that. They're talking about how they're going to do it in detail. They've really done a little bit of work already. Particularly if it's some sort of outreach to K-12 students, that kind of stuff, they've already made those connections. And then they talk in detail about how they're going to do it and how they're going to determine if they were successful. That's what you want to do here. Okay. You don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're trying to come up with ideas. There's a lot of literature out there for depending on what the topic is you're interested in. So if it's teaching, you're seeing this problem with your students or not, they don't have the mathematical background, and you're in biology, and it's becoming much more mathematical. There's work on that. Or if you're seeing that there's some issues with the way they're learning certain things, there may be literature on that. So look at the literature if you're trying to find some ideas. Okay. And then remember, you can connect to what's already going on at your at Prairie View in order, the relationships that are already going on, the organizations that are already ongoing, and you can inject, the content, but not necessarily have to build all the infrastructure in terms of if you're reaching out, for example, to middle school students. There may already be an activity where they're bringing middle school students in the summer, and you can participate in that. So again, reach out to your grants office, reach out to the people in your department, in your college, to see whether you can connect to some of that. Okay, big thing though, address what's the need of the opportunity, what are your goals, how are you going to determine if you were successful. Make sure at least one of your activities does broaden participation. Plan how you're going to disseminate your results if you're successful, so other faculty can build on those. And then, remember that having something different will make you stand out. Okay. And then be sure and budget your education. So to put funds in for what you're proposing to do. And remember, you can leverage what's already going on, right? Okay, and I think we've already done that. And then remember, you can recruit collaborators if they have a limited role. That's totally fine. Particularly, people will have collaborators in the educational realm, right? If you are going to be developing some material for middle schoolers to use, maybe you want to, recruit a teacher to help with that, right? Or maybe you need some collaborator in your research who has a particular facility that you need to use. Those kinds of things are totally fine. You will need a letter from them, but it's just a form letter. Okay. Okay. And then I mentioned talking to your department chair already. Okay. Remember, you're going to be evaluated both on the intellectual merit, which is again that new knowledge, and broader impacts. Why should we care beyond the people who are reading your journal article, right? And so that they're going to look at that. They're also going to look at how innovative what you're doing is. So how is what you're doing different from all those other people who are working in similar area? Okay. And then, are your research and education integrated? And does your education plan go beyond what is expected for all assistant professors? And is your project likely to be successful? And do you have you addressed diversity? Okay, so just to finish up, the common reasons for not funding career proposals is that you're either too ambitious, so you're proposing to do way more than reviewers think you can, or that you are too narrowly focused. So what you're doing is not going to make much of a difference. Okay. That you are proposing to do something that doesn't actually achieve your goals. So usually you aren't specific enough in what you're trying to accomplish. Your education component is either limited to really like routine courses. I'm going to develop a new course, or it's so ambitious you're never going to get tenure if you actually do all that stuff. Okay. Or what you're proposing to do in your education and outreach is not really connected to your research. So remember, it does need to be connected in some way. You don't want to be doing something totally different for your education and outreach. Okay. So there's a lot more slides that you can look at later that are all, kind of more kind of the nitty gritty of writing your proposal. So you may want to look at that. And I also did talk about that in our NSF. It's kind of a standard except for the education component. So, and there are examples in that same link that I gave you of successful NSF career proposals and sections of successful ones that I've annotated. So does anybody have any questions?
Excuse me, where is the link? I'm sorry, I joined late.
All right, right here. Do you, that is, hold on, I got it. I just sent that to Kimberly. Hold on, let me send it to everyone. All right. There we go. So that's a link. That's to a Dropbox links, and it has the slides. It has articles that I've written about career-related projects, and it has examples from successful careers that I've annotated. And it also provides a link to elsewhere where you can download entire proposals, two example proposals for that might be helpful to you just to see, you know, how other people have written their career proposals. Remember though that career proposals vary a lot by discipline, and there's a lot of flexibility in exactly how you structure your project description. So it's very helpful to get proposals from your discipline that were successful career proposals, and you can do that a lot of times by just connecting, looking at what's been funded out of the particular program, that link at the bottom of your program page at NSF on the NSF website, and talking to folks at your colleagues. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, best of luck on your career proposal. And, you know, and even if you're not ready to submit this year, remember, you can start working on your education ideas, start setting things up, doing little pilot projects. All that will help you. And then also thinking about what preliminary data you need. And so if you start now thinking about even not, if it's not this July, next July, you'll be in a great position to write a stronger career proposal.
Great information. Thank you so much, Lucy. Just want to remind everyone, in the chat box, there is a link. Kim and Shonda are offering office hours from 1:30 to 2:30 every Wednesday. So that's an opportunity for you to get one-on-one time with Shonda and with Kim, have all your questions answered. You can refer to some of the information that Lucy shared today or in some of the previous sessions. This is an opportunity for you to get some one-on-one time and have your specific questions answered. There's a link for the Zoom in the chat box. So if you'll just copy and paste that and keep it somewhere so that you'll have access to it, you'll also get a reminder. But for the early career information that Lucy shared today, if you have any questions, we'll give you just a few more minutes to ask those questions. No need to put them in the chat. You can just speak out and we'll recognize you and you can ask your questions. Shonda and Kim, do you have any additional questions?
Not questions. I just wanted to thank Lucy for, this is the last in this series. We will be having an additional summer series. We have one each semester in the summer. But Lucy is always very open and open to communication, and you can communicate with us and we will certainly relay questions if you have any or answer the best that we can. So I just really wanted to thank you for your time and for the excellence of your information and presentations.
Well, thank you. Always a pleasure. So I appreciate your inviting me to talk.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks.
As always, it has been an informative session.
Thank you. Thanks, Krishna. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful finish to the semester and enjoy your summer.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day.